Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're going to dive into the world of Keith Raniere and NXIVM.
An organization that, well, it started with this whole, promise of self-improvement and ethical living,
Right.
but really spiraled into these accusations of manipulation and abuse.
Yeah, it's a story that makes you really think,
Yeah.
where's the line between a genuine leader and a con artist?
Right. Grifter or gifted? That's what we're going to try to figure out today. We're going to use articles, court documents, even personal accounts from former NXIVM members to see if we can answer that question.
Yeah.
It's going to be a fascinating deep dive.
A lot to unpack, so let's just start at the beginning. NXIVM began in the early 90s
Okay.
as a company called Consumers Byline, co-founded by Raniere and Nancy Salzman. And they pretty quickly rebranded to NXIVM, offering what they called executive success programs.
Interesting.
And they even had some pretty influential people in their classes, like the daughters of billionaire Edgar Bronfman Sr.
Really? That's interesting how they were able to attract such a high-profile clientele so early on.
Right.
Especially considering the company was founded by somebody with, well, a kind of questionable past.
Yeah, Raniere claimed genius-level intellect,
Mm-hmm.
even boasted about a high score on the Mega Society test. You know that test?
Yeah, I've heard of it.
Multiple degrees. However, sources suggest discrepancies in those academic achievements.
Oh, right.
And there's more. Raniere's early business ventures were kind of plagued by these allegations of fraud and pyramid schemes. And one of his former partners, Barbara Boucher, initially found him captivating, but later on she called him dangerous.
Hmm.
That transformation in her perspective is pretty alarming.
It does raise questions about his true nature, right? I mean, was he a misunderstood visionary or a master manipulator from the get-go? I don't know, but maybe the seeds of what would become NXIVM were already there, present in those early ventures.
Right. Okay, so we have Raniere, this controversial figure, at the helm of NXIVM, which on the surface was all about personal growth and ethical living. And, their teachings attracted thousands of people.
Wow.
They offered intensive classes. They had kind of unusual rituals like the ESP handshake. They created this structured hierarchy within the organization.
I think it's important to acknowledge the allure of those teachings. People are often searching for meaning and purpose, and NXIVM seemed to offer a path to that.
Mm-hmm.
So the structured environment, the rituals, the sense of community, all of that could have been very appealing, especially to people feeling lost or disillusioned.
Right, and that sense of community might have made it even harder to kind of question what was happening, beneath the surface.
Yeah.
Which brings us to DOS. This is a secretive subgroup within NXIVM.
Okay.
And this is where things get really disturbing. Women were recruited into DOS as slaves, serving masters, including actress Allison Mack.
Wow.
They were even branded with a symbol that incorporated Raniere's initials.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, the DOS revelations were truly shocking.
Yeah.
It revealed a level of manipulation and control that went way beyond what most people would have imagined.
Yeah.
The branding in particular was a deeply disturbing act. It left both physical and psychological scars on the women who were involved.
Right.
We left off talking about DOS and the branding rituals.
Yeah.
It's hard to believe that something like that could exist within an organization that, outwardly promoted personal growth and ethical living.
Yeah, it is a jarring contrast, isn't it?
Right.
And it really speaks to the insidious nature of manipulation,
Yeah.
NXIVM under Raniere's leadership seemed to operate on these two levels.
Right.
This carefully constructed facade of self-improvement,
Mm-hmm.
but then this hidden underbelly of control and abuse.
Right. It makes you wonder, how were they able to keep this hidden for so long?
Right.
They had thousands of members, including some very influential people.
Yeah.
Were there any red flags that people missed along the way?
I mean, there were definitely signs.
What?
Well, for instance, the way Raniere was revered within NXIVM, he was referred to as Vanguard,
Right.
which is a title that, suggests a level of authority and unquestioning obedience.
Right. That title alone seems like a red flag.
Yeah.
And they emphasized rational inquiry,
Uh-huh.
but at the same time, Raniere's word was essentially law.
Yeah.
Didn't anyone question that?
Well, that's the paradox, isn't it?
Yeah.
They promoted critical thinking, but at the same time demanded this complete loyalty to Raniere.
Right.
So it created this confusing and potentially dangerous dynamic for followers.
Yeah.
They might have questioned their own perceptions, thinking, well, if Vanguard says this, it must be true,
Okay.
even if it felt wrong.
Yeah. And remember, many believe that Raniere was incredibly intelligent, even a genius.
Right.
So perhaps that belief in his intellect kind of blinded some to the more sinister aspects of NXIVM.
Yeah, they might have rationalized the questionable practices as part of some higher purpose they didn't yet understand.
Right. Yeah, the allure of being part of something exclusive led by a supposed genius.
Yeah.
That can be very powerful.
Yeah.
It's easy to see how people could get caught up in that, especially if they were already seeking guidance or meaning in their lives.
Absolutely.
NXIVM also had those intensive classes, and they were expensive.
Right. Oh, yeah. There were thousands of dollars for some of them.
Wow, and those high costs likely created another barrier to leaving.
Yeah, for sure. People invested significant amounts of money, time, and emotional energy into NXIVM.
Right.
So walking away would mean admitting they'd been wrong,
Yeah.
which can be incredibly difficult.
It's almost like they were trapped in a gilded cage,
Yeah.
blinded by the promises of self-improvement, and held captives by their own financial and emotional investment.
Right.
And then there's Sara Bronfman, the Seagram heiress,
Oh, yes.
who poured millions into NXIVM.
Yeah, Bronfman's role is really fascinating.
Right.
She was a true believer, fiercely loyal to Raniere, and deeply entrenched in NXIVM's system. She not only provided financial support, but also allegedly used her wealth and influence to silence critics of the organization.
Wow, her unwavering support, even in the face of mounting allegations,
Right.
is truly perplexing.
It shows how deep the belief in Raniere and NXIVM ran for some people. That level of devotion is something we see time and time again with groups that exhibit cult-like behavior. The followers become so invested in the leader and the organization's ideology that they
Right.
justify or even participate in harmful acts.
And speaking of harmful acts, we can't forget the harrowing accounts from victims like Sarah Edmondson and India Oxenberg.
Right.
They bravely came forward to expose the branding, the manipulation, and the abuse that took place within NXIVM, especially within DOS.
Yes, their testimonies were crucial in bringing down NXIVM.
Right.
It took immense courage to speak out against a powerful and secretive organization like that.
Yeah.
Their stories highlighted the dark reality behind the facade, revealing the devastating impact Raniere and his inner circle had on their lives.
Their stories are heartbreaking.
Yes.
And they serve as a reminder that manipulation and abuse can occur anywhere,
Right.
even in seemingly harmless settings.
Absolutely.
NXIVM's downfall was ultimately triggered by investigative journalism.
Yes.
The New York Times expose really blew the lid off the entire operation.
Yeah, that expose played a pivotal role. It brought the allegations to light on a national stage, leading to law enforcement investigations, and ultimately the arrest of Raniere and other key figures like Allison Mack, Sara Bronfman, and Nancy Salzman.
Right. They faced charges of racketeering, sex trafficking, and forced labor.
Yes.
Raniere himself was sentenced to 120 years in prison.
Wow.
It's a stark reminder that even those who seem untouchable can be held accountable for their actions.
Right, and while Raniere maintains his innocence to this day, the evidence presented at trial and the testimonies of numerous victims paint a very different picture.
So we've uncovered the origins of NXIVM, delved into Raniere's controversial past, examined the allure and the darkness of the organization,
Yes.
and witnessed its downfall.
And through it all, we've grappled with the question, was Keith Raniere a brilliant but misguided leader, or was he a manipulative con artist from the very beginning?
That's a question we'll continue to explore in part 3 of this deep dive as we examine the psychology of cult-like groups, the warning signs of manipulation, and the lasting impact of this case on the victims and those who were close to them. So we spent the last 2 parts unpacking the rise and fall of NXIVM, exploring the complex and often disturbing story of Keith Raniere and the organization he built.
That's quite a story.
Now let's take a step back
Okay.
and see what we can learn from all of this.
Yeah. One of the most common questions, that people ask after learning about NXIVM is how could anyone fall for this?
Right.
But it's crucial to remember that manipulation, it's a subtle and insidious process.
It's easy to judge from the outside, but I imagine it's much harder to see the warning signs when you're caught up in the moment.
Oh, yeah.
Especially when someone like Raniere, who is perceived as brilliant and charismatic, is leading the way.
Absolutely. And that's why it's so important to understand the tactics that manipulators use.
Right.
They often target people who are seeking meaning, purpose, or belonging. They offer a sense of community, a path to self-improvement, or a solution to their problems.
Like NXIVM's focus on rational inquiry and ethical living.
Right.
It sounds appealing on the surface.
It does.
But as we've seen, that can be a way to draw people in and then slowly erode their ability to think critically.
Exactly. They start by building trust and rapport,
Uh,
making you feel special and understood.
right.
But over time, they start to isolate you from your support network, your friends and family,
Yeah.
who might question what's happening.
And then there's the use of fear and guilt to maintain control, right?
Oh, yeah.
Saw that with DOS, where women were forced to provide collateral,
Right.
often compromising information or photos to ensure their obedience.
That's a classic manipulation tactic.
Yeah.
The collateral creates a sense of fear and obligation,
Right.
making it much harder for people to leave even when they realize something is wrong.
So what can we do to protect ourselves from these kinds of manipulative tactics?
Well,
What are some red flags to watch out for?
one key red flag is the presence of a charismatic leader who demands unquestioning loyalty and obedience.
Okay.
They might discourage dissent or critical thinking, claiming that they have all the answers.
Like Raniere's title Vanguard,
Yes.
and the way he was revered within NXIVM.
Exactly.
That seems like a clear warning sign in retrospect.
It is another red flag is the isolation of members from the outside world, discouraging contact with family and friends who might challenge the group's ideology.
And as we've seen, the demand for significant financial or emotional investment can also be a sign of manipulation.
Absolutely. Manipulators often use these investments to create a sense of obligation and dependence,
Right.
making it harder for people to leave.
So what's the takeaway from all of this? What have we learned from our deep dive into the world of NXIVM?
I think the biggest lesson is that manipulation can happen anywhere to anyone.
Wow.
It's not just about cults or fringe groups.
Right.
It can happen in our workplaces, our families, even our personal relationships.
That's a sobering thought, but it also empowers us to be more aware,
Right.
to question things that don't feel right,
Yes.
and to trust our instincts.
Exactly. By understanding the tactics that manipulators use,
Mm-hmm.
we can better protect ourselves and those we care about.
Right.
We can learn to recognize the red flags, to seek out diverse perspectives, and to value critical thinking.
So if you're feeling pressured to conform, if you're being isolated from loved ones, or if your gut is telling you something is wrong,
Yeah.
don't ignore those feelings. Step back.
Yeah.
Assess the situation
Mm-hmm.
and seek support from trusted sources.
Remember, you have the right to question, to disagree, and to walk away from any situation that feels unhealthy or manipulative.
Well said. This has been a truly thought-provoking deep dive into a complex and disturbing case.
It has.
We've explored the rise and fall of NXIVM, examined the psychology of manipulation, and learned valuable lessons about protecting ourselves from these kinds of harmful influences.
Important lessons for sure.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the worlds of Keith Raniere and NXIVM.
My pleasure.
We hope this episode has empowered you to be more discerning, more aware, and more resilient in the face of manipulation.